So chapter 9 speaks really about the function of both the animal soul and the divine soul as they come together in the human body. The previous chapters focused on each one separately. This chapter really speaks of how they interact and how one should really ensure that the divine soul is always in the driving seat and always in control. Here, just to go directly to where you pointed out, page 224, towards the bottom, he speaks of one of the things that maybe the thing that is the biggest obstacle to the divine soul being able to control the animal soul, and that is the quality of arrogance, of haughtiness, and which the Talmud even says that when someone is arrogant, God proclaims that he and that person, that arrogant person, and myself, God, can't dwell in the same room. Just no place for God in that room, because he takes up all the place. His arrogance is everywhere. And it's therefore maybe not just the biggest obstacle, but also to divinity, to allowing God in and to allowing your divine soul to thrive. But also maybe it becomes a destructive force in which a person stops growing because he knows it all. It's arrogant. He knows it all. And not only that, but also a person stop functioning as a divine being in this world that needs to make an impact, that has a purpose that is greater than him. Because if it's all about him, then it's nothing about the world. If it's all about me and my genius and my wisdom and my feelings and my whatever it is, then I'm me-oriented and not other-oriented, which is what the divine soul wants to be. So it becomes destructive to the self-purpose of a person. And therefore, he speaks about self-abnegation and how this is achieved specifically through chokhmah, through the brain. But let's read just this paragraph here that you pointed to, Margot, and then we can develop this idea. Bottom of 224, the faculty for self-abnegation.
Okay.
Does anyone want to read, please? Yes. Go, Margot. Yeah.
I'll read it. Nobody else wants to. Okay. The faculty of self-abnegation, the ability to be receptive to that which is outside of the self, resides in the brain, in the power of perception, which is the capacity to absorb and receive information. As explained in chapter 3, Chokhmah is koachma, power of what? The power of self-negation, of humility, the power to be what? To be nothing. Chokhmah is thus compared to the faculty of sight. Sight is utterly passive. It is the receptiveness of the eyes. Chokhmah too does not emit light, but only receives it. It does not exist by its own devices and presents no barrier to anything entering from without. Chokhmah is thus the faculty most suitable to serve as a vessel for holiness.
Right. Because, of course, the opposite of arrogance is humility, and humility is probably the prerequisite to any type of divine reception, and not just from without, but from within, divine reception of the voices of the divine soul, the voices that the divine soul whispers to us each and every day. This is your purpose. This is what you should do. We need to be humble in order to be able to receive those voices. If we're full of ourselves, again, we're blocked. Now, that comes from chokhmah. Chokhmah in Hebrew, chokhmah is a Hebrew word that's usually translated as maybe wisdom, intelligence, but maybe more wisdom. But it's interesting because if you take, and that's what he's referring to here, if you take the Hebrew word chokhmah and you divide it into two, the first word spells koach. We just switch the letters around, kaf chet instead of chet kaf, but it's koach, which means the power, strength, power. And then the second word is ma, which means what? The power of what? That's what chokhmah is. It's not just wisdom, it's the power of what? What does that mean? Chokhmah is the ability to say, okay, what? I'm missing something. I have to learn something. I'm not as complete as I thought I was. Arrogance tells you you're complete. Chokhmah tells you you're not. You have so much more to learn. It's the power of asking what. And you can only ask what if you push yourself aside, if you push your ego aside, if you recognize that there's so much more to grow, so much more to learn. By the way, I think that's one of the great differences between the Hebrew term and the Talmudic term for sages, as opposed to the Greek term for sages. The Greeks called their sages philosophers, right? Which means, philo means to love, Sophie means wisdom, lovers of wisdom. The Talmud calls their sages, the Jews call their sages, not lovers of wisdom, philosophers, but Talmid Chacham, which means the student of wisdom. Not lovers of wisdom, but students of wisdom. And if you think about this, there's a massive difference there. Greeks are lovers of wisdom. We recognize that in order to really be receptive to wisdom, we have to be students. We have to always be humble and recognize that there's so much more to grow, so much more to learn, like students do. We're never quite arrived. Rabbi Steinsaltz would very often say that if you think you've arrived, you're lost. It doesn't. That's what you really lost. But the recognition that I've never arrived, I'm always on a growth path. I'm always growing, and therefore I'm always humble to be receptive to Chokhmah. That's when I can really learn. That's when I can really grow. That's when I can really build on, and that's when I can really fulfill my divine purpose and be, again, receptive to what my divine soul needs of me and requires of me. I will add one more thing, since we're in the festival of Sukkot. You know, we said under the Sukkah, I mentioned this in throughout the Chag at CBT, but the Sukkah is an interesting structure. It's interesting on many levels. It's compared by some to the chuppah canopy under which we get married, because in a way, after God has forgiven us on Yom Kippur, we've renewed our vows with God, and that's what Sukkot is all about, the renewal of vows. So we're under his chuppah. That's what the Sukkah is. But what's interesting is that the Sukkah also is covered with schach, right? Some use palm branches, some use those kosher mats, bamboo sticks, whatever it may be. But the schach needs 3 requirements in order for it to be kosher. Otherwise, we can't use it. Requirement number 1 is that it comes from the ground, right? That's why you have to use vegetation, palm branches, bamboo sticks, and so on. Requirement number 2 is that it's detached from the ground. You can't have like a tree that's leaning on the sukkah. It has to be cut off from the ground. And number 3, it cannot be susceptible to impurity, and therefore it cannot be a finished product. The finished product is susceptible to impurity. So if you have like a wooden chair, you can't put it as a schach because it's a finished product. It's a chair. And in a way, the schach is really the recipe for this type of life that we all strive for, a life that's driven by the divine soul. Number 1, we have to recognize where we come from. We have to know our roots. Rabbi Steinsaltz would often say to people who would introduce themselves to him, don't tell me, he would tell them, tell me about yourself, but don't start where you were born. Start with your grandparents. That's a more complete picture of yourself. Well, who are your grandparents? You have to know where you came from. Or as Winston Churchill put it, you cannot know where you are going if you do not know where you came from. On the other hand, you can't just rely on where you came from. You can't just say, oh, my great-grandparents were righteous people. Look, I'm so proud. What about you? You have to build for yourself your own life, your own impact. So you have to be detached from the ground in some sort. And the third, and this is what's connected to what we're saying here, the third most important ingredient is that we can never see ourselves as a finished product. If we see ourselves as a finished product, then we're susceptible to impurity. We always have to be under construction. And that can only be achieved with humility. An arrogant person is complete. He's building, is the nicest. But a humble person recognizes there's so much more to grow, so much more to do, so much more to learn. You've never really arrived. You never finished product. That's what the Schach teaches us about the 3 ingredients to really a divine life. But again, very much connected. I want to be the only one speaking. Please, if you want to share some thoughts, disagreements, comments, questions, please feel free to do so.
I think everybody is sort of humble, though. I mean, everybody that takes a class or everybody that, wants to continue their education, you have to be humble to do that. Not everybody, but you should be.
Right. No, very well said. You're right. Yeah, you have to be, and certainly everyone here is very
There's
humble.
so much more to learn all the time.
Absolutely, absolutely, right. Yeah, very well said. Yeah, there's a great letter that Nachmanides. It's worth googling. Nachmanides wrote to his son, and it's a letter in which he teaches him that some of the most important qualities of life, and one of the main lines in that letter is remember to always be humble. I'm gonna read it to you right here. I have it. So I'm just gonna read it out loud. You know what? I'm actually gonna share it here on the screen. It's just a very powerful letter, and since it's on the subject, I'm going to share it. Nachmanides, by the way, lived in the 1200s. He was a man who transformed the Jewish world in so many ways. First, with his commentary to the Chumash, to the Torah. It's one of the only few commentaries that he's printed together with the words of the Torah in many of the editions. He was a Kabbalist. He was a physician. He was a man who also was the leader of the Jewish world in his times, who fought the forced conversions by the Catholics in his times in Spain. He lived in Spain. He was known also for his public debate against a converted Jew, a Jew converted to Catholicism, Pablo Cristiani, by the instruction of the king. It was a lose-lose situation for Nachmanides, because if he would win, he would be humiliating the Catholics, and he would suffer from that, no doubt. If we would lose, then people would say, "Oh, you see, Catholicism, Christianity is the truth, not Judaism." So it was a lose-lose situation, but he was forced into this debate in the year 1270, if I'm not mistaken, or 1273 or 1270, something like that. And he won the debate. He was even awarded by the king a big bag of coins, and the king came to visit him on that Shabbat. But of course, it didn't finish up that way. Eventually, there was a revolt, and he was kicked out of Spain, and he moved to Israel, where he settled in Jerusalem, built for himself his own synagogue in the Old City. You can still go to the Nachmanides synagogue in the Old City. And he died there 3 years later. Yeah, so the debate was in 1270. He died in 1273. But that was Nachmanides, and this is what he wrote to his son as the principles of life. So I'm sharing this letter here, and you'll see the theme of humility all over the place. So he goes like this: "Hear, my son, the instruction." Here, this is a quote from Book of Proverbs. "And habituate yourself always to speak all your words calmly to all people at all times. Through this, you will be saved from anger. For it is an evil trait causing people to sin. As our teachers said, whoever gets angry, all sorts of Gehinnom rule over him," and so on. Then the next paragraph: "Once you will be saved from anger, the trait of humility will enter your heart." And listen to what he says. "This trait is the best of all the good traits. As written, the heel of humility is the fear of God. And then through humility, the trait of fear of God will also enter your heart, for you will put to your heart always where you came from and where you are going, that you are like a maggot and a worm during your life and also after death, and before whom you are destined to give a judgment and accounting before the Supreme King." Here he quotes the Mishnah. But again, I just wanted to emphasize this quote here, that this trait is the best of all the good traits. It's what he taught his son. It's a letter worth Googling. But it's true. It's the key to all great things. Okay. So that is achieved again with Chokhmah, the perception of recognizing that there's always so much more to learn, the power of what, as we said, and always being a student of life, so to speak. It's also why the Mishnah says, who is wise, what is chokhmah, who is wise, Ezel Chacham. It says in Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 4, Mishnah 1, who is wise, who he learns from everybody. It's interesting, because if you ask someone today who is wise, you know what answer you'll get? Well, if you have 7 PhDs, you're wise. If you went to an Ivy League school, you're wise. No, that's not what the Mishnah says. Wisdom really can belong to everybody. It doesn't have to belong to the few who went to Harvard or Yale or whatever it is. If you learn from everybody, you're wise. Why? Because you have the trait of humility, which is the key to wisdom. Rabbi Steinsaltz would often say that he's met many different people in his life, and he's met presidents of countries and big professors and Nobel Prize winners. He would often say that he met many people with a lot of PhDs, but they were the dumbest people in the world. Why? Because if you're really wise, you learn from every person. And the second that those PhDs get to your head and you become the most arrogant person, then you're really not wise. Anyway, that's the idea. Okay, let's continue at the bottom of page 224, unless again, there's more comments, questions, whatever it may be. No? Okay, let's continue. And from there it extends. So speaking of Chokhmah, from there it extends. Go for it.
From there it extends to all organs and the limbs. The godly soul abides and is first expressed in the mind. From there, clothed in consciousness and thought, it can spread to the other organs by way of feeling and action, and also in the heart. The godly soul also has a residence in the heart, where its midot, emotional faculties, reside. But this expression of the godly soul remains latent until aroused by the brain.
Right, it's interesting because the big question, right, is, and it's a question that philosophers also ask, where does the soul dwell? The Tanya seems to say that the soul dwells first and foremost in the brain. From the brain, it goes to the other attributes of the human being. So from the brain, it goes to the heart, and then to the faculties of the heart, the emotions of the heart. But it starts in the brain, which is a fascinating idea. Because what this is saying is that we can only truly express the power of the divine soul through thought. That now, it doesn't mean that emotions don't count, because eventually those thoughts must awaken the emotions. And the emotions also need to be a part of it. And we also need to be passionate about the service of God. But it's got to start at the brain. Why? Because the brain has a quality that the heart does not. The world of the heart is very noisy, very boisterous, very, very busy. The world of the mind is quite opposite. The world of the mind knows how to decipher, decode all of the outside information, and it knows what is important, what is trivial. It's very cold. It's not as warm as the heart, and it's also very clear and not as confused as the heart. And therefore, the divine soul begins to express itself in the mind, because through the mind, it can draw for itself a map of, okay, let me think. Am I reacting now rightfully and divinely or not? Maybe I shouldn't react altogether. I have this outside information. I have this outside occurrence. Something happened to me, whether it's a challenge from a person or a challenge from an event, whether it's at work or whether it's in life altogether. Something is happening. I'm having all this outside information come to me. If you want to act divinely, start with the brain. Don't go to the heart, because the brain will know how to measure that challenge, and it will tell you it's not worth responding to it. It will also tell you maybe it's a trivial challenge and ignore it altogether. And it will sometimes maybe tell you, yes, it's worth responding, but in a very measured way. Now, that can't be done by the heart. The heart is too emotional. That's why, by the way, the Tanya goes on to say much later on that if there is an outside event that really rattles the person, we all experience that in life. Sometimes outside events, outside people or annoyances rattle us, especially if we're more on the emotional side. I think that's That's also quite determined at birth. Some people are just more hot-tempered than others. Some people are more emotional than others. There's nothing wrong with that. But if there's an outside event that happens and we're rattled, then the Tanya would tell you, wait. Why do you have to wait? Wait a day, wait 2 days. Don't respond immediately. Why? Because if you wait, then you're allowing the brain to surface and the emotions to calm down. And then you can think through your brain and have the divine soul express itself at its best through the brain, as it is saying right here. But if you respond immediately when you're in a rattled state, then you will be responding through the heart, and that's not what the divine soul expresses itself first. So wait, pause, and then respond. But that's the genius of this. So there's the chokhmah, the ability to say, okay, let me think about this. And the deeper idea behind this is not just that because the brain is more cold, more calculated, more measured, and therefore more effective. But it is also because what the brain has is wisdom. What's wisdom? Humility, as we just explained. And we want to be able to respond to outside circumstances and events and people with humility by saying, okay, maybe this is happening for a reason. Maybe I have something to learn. Yes, it might be something very, very terrible that is happening to me, but I have to be humble enough to understand, oh, there's a blessing in this. Maybe God is sending me a lesson. Maybe there's a signal. And that humility is really what enables us really to grow and to continue to see God's blessings, even in places where they are not necessarily found, by the naked eye, but by the spiritual eye, yes. I will tell you this. I'm going to connect this to Sukkot too, because just one second. I'm going to connect this to Sukkot too. So we spoke about the Sukkah. The other mitzvah of Sukkot is that we shake the 4 species, right? And the 4 species are the etrog, which is some type of citrus fruit. Then we have the lulav, which is the palm branch. Then we have the hadas, which is the myrtle branch. And then we have the willow, the arava, the willow branch. Now, what's interesting is that there are many parallels to these 4 species. One of the parallels that the Midrash makes is that really they are parallel to 4 parts of the body. The etrog looks like a heart, and therefore it's parallel to the heart. The lulav looks like the spine, right? That's why it's a tall palm branch that's closed. So it's parallel to the spine. The hadas, the myrtle branch, is a 3-leaved plant that comes, in sets of 3 leaves. That looks like the eye. And the arava, which is a myrtle branch, comes in sets of 2 leaves, 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 leaves, one after the other in each and every branch. And that's parallel to the lips of a person. And in a way, what the 4 species are reminding us to do is to work on our heart, to work on our spine, on our self-esteem, to work on our lips, what we say and what we don't say, and to work on our eyes, what we see and we choose not to see. Because that's key. Those are the 4 key organs to a meaningful life again. We have to know how to feel. We have to know how to have this healthy self-esteem. We need to know what to see and what not to see, and we need to know what to say and what not to say. What's interesting, though, is this. If we are really drawing this parallel, it makes sense. There's 1 heart, and therefore 1 etrog. There is 1 spine in a human body, and therefore 1 lulav. There are 2 lips, and therefore 2 leaves in sets of 2 sets of leaves in every branch of the willow branch. But when it comes to the eyes, there are 3 leaves, 3 sets of leaves in the myrtle branch. There should be 2 if we are really drawing a parallel, right? 2 eyes, 2 leaves for the hadas, for the myrtle. But there are 3. And the answer, and this is where they took it from us also, the answer is there's a 3rd eye. You know what the 3rd eye is? The divine eye. The divine eye here in the brain that teaches us how to look at things. Exactly what we're speaking about. Before we react, emotionally, before we decipher situations, we have to understand, well, what does God think? What does God see? What would God want us? How would God want us to see the situation? That's that third eye. And this is expressed again through the mind. Can't be expressed through the heart, because the heart's world is too noisy and turbulent and confused.
Does every person have a soul? Because you can live without a brain, but you can't live without a heart.
Right. I mean, can you live without a brain? There's this brain that yeah. Yeah, I mean, everybody that's alive has a soul. That's what gives us life.
So, Rabbi,
yes.
What happens if you have Alzheimer's and you're not aware of your surroundings?
That's a great question. Look, then Alzheimer is also not too much under our control, right? It's not at all under our control, I would say. And if it's in a way, it's a decree, it's a heavenly decree that we can't really understand. But God wanted the person of Alzheimer still has a soul. The person of Alzheimer, therefore, can still do soulful things like, I don't know, even give tzedakah, even though they might not be aware, or give tzedakah, wear tefillin. They can still do soulful things. That heavenly decree is sometimes too big for us to understand. But that soul is still there until our last breath. By the way, when a person passes on, not that I want to finish on that note, but it's nonetheless a positive one if you think about this deeply. When a person passes on, the Jewish custom is that at the time of death, we open the window of the room in which that dead person is found, or that dying person is found. We open the window. If there's no window, you open the door. Why? To allow the soul to leave. So that emphasizes this belief that the soul is there until the very last breath of the person. And whether that person had Alzheimer or that person was very sick, or the soul is forever there until the last breath. And then it leaves. But it also begs the question, so if our soul is within us, it's residing within us, are we giving it some expression? Are we listening to it? Are we following its calling? And that's what the Tanya, I think, is trying to do here on chapter 9, to make us aware of those questions, and at the same time, to make us follow those questions and answer them with an affirmative yes. All right, friends, we got to go on. Today is a special day, by the way, in the Jewish calendar. It's called Hoshana Rabbah. According to many, this is the Talmud also. This is when the gates of heaven are finally being closed. After Yom Kippur, they remained open a little, and God now seals the final judgment. And therefore, it's a day in which we can devote ourselves to more acts of kindness, to prayer. Prayer is longer today, and to all good things, so that our judgment is sealed in the best of ways, and we'll have in mind not just ourselves, but our world all together. And we should shake the heavens for Mashiach to come already, because we have the power to do so, no doubt, today.